Hello, everyone. Welcome to CloudCamp 10-year anniversary. It's really wonderful to be able to put this together again and have conversations about cloud computing, and this time with a Kubernetes flavor. And I'm really thankful for the folks who have volunteered to come and speak here today. I'm sure that we'll have a lot of very interesting presentations, demos, and conversations, and even an unconference. So I wanted to open up this conversation by just sharing a few thoughts about where we are today based on the 375 cloud camps we've had in over 100 cities around the world. Most of that roughly around 8 or 9 years ago. But the conversations have never stopped. They've just moved mostly online, and now everyone seems to be a part of it. But I want to pose you a question. The reason why I felt motivated to come here isn't because CloudCamp started 10 years ago. It's because of what started roughly around, at least for me, about 2 years ago. And that was the first time I ever deployed an application on Kubernetes. And I did that on the Google Cloud. And it seemed like a pretty darn good idea. This seemed to encapsulate a lot of the ideas that we had been discussing over the years, and sure enough, it's caught on in a massive way, and we now have multiple hyperscale clouds, at least Amazon, Google, Microsoft, all running Kubernetes as a service. And that's a new thing. We've never had the cloud vendors running a cloud operating system as a service like this before. So that poses some new opportunities for those of us in the cloud community, thanks to those who've put in the work so far. And the question that I pose to you is open source code really open source if it only runs on one cloud?
Yes.
I think the answer is yes, but doesn't that then provide us another question, which is, does it matter if your open source code can run on multiple clouds? Right? If you write code that can run on Kubernetes, theoretically it can run on any of those clouds, right? That are running Kubernetes. But that's not true, because you've all heard this before. There's the motto, embrace and extend. Where have we heard that before? For those of you who've been around for about 20 years, you probably know what that means. So if you write code that runs on Kubernetes, but then you start using data services and other services that are specific to one cloud for your open source application, will that code run on other Kubernetes environments? Maybe, maybe not. Doesn't matter.
When can we start arguing?
Good. That's what I'm hoping we'll do. All right. So I wanted to pose that question and follow up by saying that I do believe that it is important. And what I wanted to do is start off this day with a panel. We've got 4 panelists. And let me get my trusty little iPhone out here just to make sure I get everyone right. First and foremost, I want to invite Larry Carvalho to come up. Larry, come on up. Larry is the PaaS analyst at IDC, and he's also a good friend of mine. We traveled the world together running cloud camps in many countries, and Larry ran many of them on his own, and we really just enjoyed gallivanting around the world talking about cloud. So Larry, come on up and pick a seat. Next, I want to invite Chris Richardson. So Chris Richardson used to run a company, maybe he still does, called chrisrichardson.net. At least that was the domain name.
Microsoft Microservices Consulting and Training Worldwide.
Well, come on up, Chris. While he's coming up, I want you to know that about 10 years, a little over 10 years ago, he registered a domain name called cloudfoundry.com and actually created the first version of Cloud Foundry. And I know you don't want to, perseverate on that too long, but he created the company, sold it to Spring. Spring was acquired by VMware. VMware then relaunched a bigger and polyglot Cloud Foundry. But a lot of those ideas that we were talking about at the very first CloudCamp, actually, 10 years ago, were ideas that have floated through and are now part of the successful platform as a service vendors today, largely due to folks like Chris, who had the vision. So I want to thank you for being up here. And he's now running a company called Eventuate.io. Did I say that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, good. All right. Always got to check. All right. So thank you for coming. I really appreciate you after all the conversations we've had and the talks you've given for being here today. Next, I'd like to invite Louis Pebon. He's on the technical staff at Portworx. And Louis is a long-time I consider it hardware. It's not really hardware. It's storage. Storage has a big software component, of course. But that's obviously one of the areas that has, I would say, just plagued the cloud over the years, and it still continues to provide challenges. So, if we're going to be successful with Kubernetes, it's got to solve that problem, and I want to hear him share some of his thoughts. And finally, I would like to invite Tanmay. Let me make sure I get this correct here. Tanmay Gopal of Hasura, coming up. Now, Tanmay I only recently met, and Tanmay has given some presentations on the topic called GitOps, which I first learned about through Weaveworks. But I've been not only impressed by his presentations, but also his mastery and understanding of Kubernetes and how it works. So from just the perspective of somebody who's building not only their own platform as a service, but also components and applications that run in a Kubernetes world, I'd like to have him up here to share some of your what I would consider newer thoughts, but I'm sure you've had many for many years. So anyway, this is our panel. And so I'm going to go back to the point of contention that I stirred up just a few moments ago, if I don't fall off the stage here. And that is open source important? Is it important if open source code can run on Kubernetes but across multiple clouds? Is that important? So what do you guys think about that? First of all, if you have when you answer the question, if you have any opening thoughts, feel free to share them. And I'm going to hand you the mic. Here you go.
Well, I mean, one of my first points I want to make is to answer your sort of second question about, well, you write an application for Kubernetes. And I guess I sort of disagree with that in the sense that, as an application developer, I'm writing my application. And, it doesn't matter whether it's Node.js or Spring Boot or whatever. And then Kubernetes is merely the place that runs my application. And I think that's an important distinction. So yeah, from an operational point of view, how you package it up, how you deploy it, obviously it's a flavor of Kubernetes. But the essence of what my application is I think many applications, they don't care where they run, right? Except unless you go with the serverless model, right, which is kind of a programming model plus a runtime. So that's sort of my perspective on this. Kubernetes is merely the place where my stuff runs.
Okay, very good. Anybody have a comment on
I want to talk a little bit about open source. One of the differences that I've seen working in open source for many years now is there's a big difference between open source and open community. So if you make an open source application and you don't let anybody else change it, sure, you give it away for free, and you can control it. But that doesn't make it a community. So what I mean by that is that if you make it applications that only runs on services on AWS and you don't care about running it anywhere else, you will be tied down to AWS. But if it was an open community and you allow changes, then maybe they abstract that to other changes. So open community is a big difference, and it is involved and it is time consuming, but I think in the end it has better innovation.
I'm going to take a step as to why people choose open source. Right? They want to choose open source because of the community contributions, but along with that comes the lack of locking. People consider locking. So if you choose open source, the expectation is that multiple cloud providers will adapt that open source standard and will be able to run on them. So there are two reasons, and I would think that even though you may not just pick up your code and run it somewhere, the effort to move some workloads from one cloud to another is going to be less than perhaps going from one database to another database or a proprietary database where open source may be a big difference in effort. So all I'm saying is that the portability is much easier on open source.
Yeah, I think coming from the point of view of a developer that was, I think, sort of born on the cloud, or I started working in Kubernetes, it's probably one of my first substrates. I think we and I end up choosing open source technologies to go with just because there's a community around it. So it's not really about the fact that it's open source or not, but it's just really the fact that there's a super active community around it. And I wasn't there in the MSDN days, so I don't know how, because I was supposed to be one of those really big communities. And I don't know what the ethic then was, but the ethic now is that if it's open source, there's a huge community around it, and that's when you choose the technology. Like, there's just the best documentation, the best tutorials, the best guides. It works everywhere. It's portable. You can take out stuff from there and put somewhere else. And as long as that is met, the fact that it's open source is almost a detail from that kind of first order analysis of whether you want to use the tech or not. So I mean, that's kind of the way.
Okay, you can keep that one. You can share that. Okay, so yeah, I know I'm going to fall off. It's all part of the show, folks. Is Dave going to fall off the stage? And sorry, I'll walk over here a little bit too, because that way I'm not with my back to everyone all the time. Okay, so I also read a recent article that shared that developers actually don't care that much about open source. They care about free. That was kind of an interesting article. I beg to differ on that, but I do believe very strongly that free is huge, important, to lowering the barriers so folks can get started. But yes, I have a hand up over there. What do you say? What do you have to say?
I mean, free's part of it because it can be cost efficient, but if it doesn't meet requirements for what you're trying to accomplish, it's shit.
Right.
You know, I mean, it really doesn't matter if it's free or not. If it doesn't do the job, if it doesn't meet the requirements from an operational perspective, whether it's flexibility, whether it's reliability, it really doesn't matter whether it's open source or not. You know?
Okay, so our, I don't know if you can hear out there, but he's saying that it doesn't matter if it doesn't meet the requirements. Free is shit, if I'm quoting that. If it doesn't meet the requirements, then who cares if it's free? And I think that's where the community comes in as well, because the community helps fill out those requirements and make the product or the software that the developers need. So I don't want to focus on this too much. But my point though is that if the application code that we create only can run on one of the hyperscale clouds, does that really meet the goals that we have as an open source community that is build an open community around software? What if that community ends up only running on one cloud? Is that good? Are we hoping for that? Yes, we have a hand up here first, Chris, so let me give this guy a chance. Yes?
The distinction is that you're talking about an individual piece of software taking non-open source dependencies.
Right.
Modern software is the graph of all the connected software required to produce the result. Modern software is the graph of all the software that you're using. fact that can be portable, but you're taking cloud-specific dependencies, that's not bad.
Okay, very good. Very good. So if there are too many cloud-specific dependencies too many times, then we run into some restrictions that may not be helpful and meet our goals. All right, Chris, you had something to say?
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like we're conflating two very orthogonal concepts.
Okay. I often do that.
Yeah, I mean, open source is open source, whether or not whether or not it's like portable across clouds. It's to me an entirely separate concern. I mean, like from my perspective, like if I was building an application, I would go all in on whatever services my favorite cloud happens to use, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I'll probably deploy an application on top of Kubernetes, but it will probably be using DynamoDB, for instance, right? Or whatever other services AWS provides. And the same would be true if you're building on top of Azure or Google Cloud. And from my perspective as an application developer, hell yeah, because every managed service that I use is one sort of, is less undifferentiated heavy lifting that I'm not doing. And that's huge. So yeah, so in this multi-cloud thing, at some level that's, I don't know if I'm being a bit negative, but a lot of that comes from vendors who are trying to sort of add something to clouds in a way that trying to create value where sometimes it's not needed.
So I would like to counter that by saying I've had multiple conversations just in the last 2 weeks with very large companies who told me that when they deploy onto their favorite cloud, they also, at the very same time, deploy to the other two hyperscale clouds every single time, and these are very large workloads. Now that was not possible before, not at all possible. So something has changed.
But when you do, I mean, I know, and large companies, they like to play off vendors against one another to avoid lock-in, but at the same time, what's the opportunity cost, right? Like if I'm having to write my code that's portable across clouds, there's a potentially large development cost there, right? Longer time to market, for example, and so I would be very cautious about that.
So in other words, what you're saying is that if we make it easier to deploy your applications across multiple clouds, we reduce the time to market for those companies who feel the need to deploy across multiple.
I think so.
Excellent. Louis, did you have a comment?
Just a quick thing, I just wanted to mention that it all depends on cost. Meaning that if you think that the cost of the amount of usage of DynamoDB or any RDS or anything that you're going to use will, how will that look in the next 2 or 3 years? While if on the other hand you maintain your own database and you can then move easily from one class to another. So you just have to determine the cost of engineering and maintenance of your own database is less than the tie-in and you're unable to move out there. So it all depends on the cost.
Okay, very good. All right. Okay, so we're going to move on. What I'd now like to do is to ask each of you to share your thoughts about, here we go. So the question is, we've all seen Steve Ballmer bouncing around on stage in a sweaty shirt yelling, developers, 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 right? And so I will make the argument that developers are critical to the success of a platform. I don't even think that's a question. Maybe some others do. But we have many examples of this where the term content is king has been around for decades now. And what does that mean? Well, in the Netflix world, it means that you may have the most beautiful platform for distributing and viewing movies and TV shows that has ever been made. But if you don't have the content that the viewers want to see, it will not be used. you have to have the content. Content is still king. Now, what does that have to do with Kubernetes? Well, even though it appears that Kubernetes has won in some way, because it is now running on at least 3 hyperscale clouds, it has not won yet. We are in the very early stages of this, and I can guarantee you that if 1 or 2 of those clouds could beat Kubernetes with its own tooling in platforms, they would gladly do so. And then we would be back to a non-transferable code base or platform. So what is going to help Kubernetes become successful in the end is content. And what is content in this metaphor? It is application code. It's probably open source code that a developer can choose to help build their own application, and it will run across multiple cloud Kubernetes environments. So the question then is, that is my position, that content is king, and only if Kubernetes can attract developers to build the application code that other developers want, and therefore download and run on their favorite Kubernetes environment, only then will Kubernetes actually be successful. Otherwise, it may just turn out to be the next, let's see, Eucalyptus, CloudStack, OpenStack, Cloud Foundry to some degree. I mean, I would say it's successful, but it's certainly not everywhere.
Can I agree with you?
You're going to agree with me? I don't know, is that right? Let's have a vote. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, so briefly, I mean, I agree with you in the sense that when you say content, and I translate that into services, right? So, for instance, if there's a super easy way to run Kafka, like I guess like Confluent announce like their Kafka operator, that sounds awesome, right? And so more content like that is super useful. So it makes it easy to get stuff done. I mean, where I would disagree with you is I'm an application developer. I'm writing code using libraries that can happily run anywhere, right? Like my Java libraries have nothing to do with Kubernetes, right? And so I, half agree with you there.
Well, that's progress. All right. All right, so we can take, okay, one more question from the audience. Hold on a second.
I would just say that arguably the distinction here is that part of the content for cloud-native applications is the operational code. So you mentioned the operator. I think that is the change that we're talking about. That when you talk about service, you're also including enough of the operations to make it useful without having to be an expert.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent comment. And we will come back and talk more about operators, so I'm glad that's come up. Okay, so yeah, we're going to let each of you, so Larry and Tanmay, if you want to share your final thoughts on what you think is going to take to be successful.
So I agree with the content, but I'll just put it in a little different way. If you think about cloud marketplaces and how a developer can compose an application by bringing together services from marketplaces, that's content too. So when you see that somebody would take Kubernetes but also create a marketplace on their cloud that one ISV can take the service, make it easily available. Developers want ease of use, ease of being able to compose an application. That would contribute to the success of Kubernetes. So it might differentiate between one mega cloud provider to another one by what they provide on their marketplace.
So we might need an app store for Kubernetes-based apps.
Well, I think that we could use the existing app store, but categorize it from there and then we give the developers the ease of use or whatever we need.
Very good. Okay. And Emma, born on the cloud.
Yeah, I think from a very kind of bottoms-up point of view, I would say, I think to just add these points, not a big point, but a lot of content, like genuine just content around making it easy for developers to understand how Kubernetes works or how Kubernetes deploys or configures my application. I think that is one of the early barriers when you start as a developer deploying your stuff on Kubernetes and then debugging it or trying to operate it on Kubernetes. But I think like making it easy for developers to use, either by I don't know if thinner abstractions make sense or improving kubectl makes sense, but something needs to be done to kind of make it easier for application developers to use Kubernetes, because application developers today are in the Docker Compose camp. The best that application developers get towards doing something like orchestration is they move to Docker Compose, and that doesn't work for anybody from the ops side of things because that's very intuitive, right? Doesn't handle the kind of use cases you want. But Docker Compose is simple. Docker Compose is I write Postgres configuration, I write app configuration, I do Docker Compose up. I don't have that in Kubernetes today, right? And I think trying to move in that direction, I don't know what that's going to look like, whether it's going to be boilerplates, or whether it's going to be educational content, or it's going to be new tooling, or whether it's going to be Docker Compose like tooling, where Docker Compose is making that Docker Compose abstraction available on Kubernetes today.
And I believe, if I heard correctly this week, you can do that with Compose to deploy on Kubernetes. Yeah. So that could be a very interesting progress. And let me wrap this up by asking you, Tenmai, how does that compare to something like a Helm chart or some of the other? How does a Helm chart compare to that? Where are they in comparison?
This is recorded. Helm charts are great.
No, it's okay. Share your thoughts. That's what we're here for. Share your thoughts.
As a developer, so let's say you have Kubernetes manifests, and if you go in a developer-friendly and less flexible direction, you go Compose, and if you go in a unnecessary abstraction direction, you get to have no, it's necessary abstraction. So it's kind of like that, right? So I think as a developer, I understand why Helm can be useful, but I don't understand why I need to learn both Kubernetes, and I have to learn two things. I don't want to learn two things. I want to stop at learning one thing, right? So I did Kubernetes manifest, I understand how Kubernetes works, and now I need to understand how Helm works on top of Kubernetes manifests, which is inconvenient. So that is nice, I think, for not developers. But if you're looking at making it easy for developers to use things, I'm not sure if abstractions over manifests are the right way to go. But maybe it is.
Okay. Oh, we have some comments. Okay, we'll go on to a few more moments.
Yeah, I mean, just one comment. I think Kubernetes is not developer friendly, right?
Oh, wow. Ooh, hiss, boo, hiss, hiss. Uh-oh, some nods. I see some nods.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, in comparison, what's developer friendly is CF push.
Yes. For those of you who don't know the reference, that's a Cloud Foundry reference. Okay.
Well, yeah. I mean, but just like, here's my code.
Right.
At some level, right?
And by the way, I heard some folks in the Cloud Foundry, or in the Kubernetes ecosystem, starting to use that haiku in a new way, but with new wording, but basically for the same reason. You talk about the what's his name who wrote the haiku from Pivotal? I forgot his name, but it goes something like, here is my code, run it in the cloud, I do not care how.
Yeah.
Something like that, which is actually very wonderful requirement, I think.
Because having to at some level, building a Docker image, pushing it to a registry, writing the YAML file, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's not that complicated, but it's, the level of abstraction, the gap in abstraction between here's my Spring Boot application, make it go, versus what you have to do today is quite huge and repetitive, right?
Right.
So in a sense, maybe Kubernetes is one layer of abstraction, and there's something else on top to make it into a path in the true sense.
True. Very good. Okay.
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
Last thoughts.
I think if you think of Kubernetes not as a path, but as the operating system, then we start making better algorithms. When we get an operating system, we start Linux, and we just start seeing the POSIX calls, we say, oh, these POSIX calls are terrible, I can't do anything with them. If you write an application, you start writing things on top, time it can be easier for the user. And they don't really see the primitives of the operating system. They see the changes you've done with the applications. And it's the same way, I think Kubernetes is trying to reach that level. And one of those levels is by extensions. Another way is by the operators and using CRDs. So you are able, it's enabling other players to innovate in this manner to allow for easier installation or application and so on, having Kubernetes be stable and being at scale. And that's really what Kubernetes is going after, right? And it is a little bit complicated and really great, but I think it's leaving it up to others to say, you can make this better by writing an operator or a raw application with a CRD and making it easier for users to consume.
So the perhaps we could say that, as we were talking about earlier over coffee, that if you have a fully opinionated platform as a service, like perhaps a Cloud Foundry or OpenShift perhaps, you have a very straight and smooth road to drive down, okay? Possibly, if you are comfortable with those opinions and restrictions. And therefore you can, take any car and drive easily. Whereas with something like Kubernetes, it's more like an open road with rocks and other obstacles, and but the beauty of that is that you can turn the wheel and go in different directions that maybe you need to go, but you can't drive any car. You need some sort of four-wheel drive, right?
Isn't there a difference between looking at the platform and how the platform actually manages operating your application and application development lifecycle? In my view, developers should not be talking directly to Kubernetes ever. Right? That should be handled by a continuous integration pipeline, which could be talking to a PaaS, like Cloud Foundry or OpenShift, or could be talking directly to Kubernetes or even other infrastructure if necessary. Right? So if you abstract it like that, the developer interface should be their source code management. Right? That's what they're really trying to manage, is the code itself. And then the operations can help remove all the other abstractions that would otherwise get in the way.
And so in that way, maybe we have a very much a Linux model where you have the pure open source version that very few people actually use, but then you have the vendors who've taken it and packaged it, made it easier to use, and provide that developer experience that you're talking about. So, again, like we can look back at history and learn how to perhaps solve some problems in the present. So with that, thank you for joining me on this panel and talking about lessons learned from the past that we might be able to use, and the recent past that we might be able to use to help our Kubernetes friends in the future. So thank you very much.